For the past few years, I feel like I've been less productive with my game development endeavors. This year though, I managed to finish and release my first Steam game, Breezy, and create 2 new game prototypes, along with learning a new engine and participating in several game jams. Oh yeah, I also went to college. I want to discuss the techniques I used to get more done this year, for game dev and just in general. First up, time management. Yeah, I know it sounds obvious, but it's more than just the kind of time management you're probably thinking of. I've always been the kind of fella to get my school assignments turned in on time, and I don't waste hours scrolling instead of working on my games. It's the more large-scale time management I'm referring to. For example, I've made plenty of warnings in the past about scope creep, and I've prided myself on not succumbing to it in my game dev career, but looking back on Breezy's development, I spent way too much time just working on random features since I didn't have a real timeline or even a deadline. Even besides those large-scale decisions, simple tweaks to my routine did a lot to help me manage my time better. A big one was moving all my note-taking to this open source app called Obsidian. I used OneNote for Breezy since it allowed you to draw some rudimentary scribbles, but it eventually started feeling too cumbersome and restrictive. Obsidian is proudly plain text-based and stored on your computer, and it has a much more useful feature set than OneNote, at least for programmers like me. Obsidian is based on Markdown, so it supports all the useful formatting out of the box, along with embedded code and LaTeX for writing math symbols. I'm using OneVault, basically a notebook, for all my lecture notes and homework at school, and OneVault for organizing my game dev prototypes, plans, and video scripts. The most important part of time management, though, is just practicing it in the first place, for long enough that it becomes a habit. Part of the reason Breezy took so long to make is that I never really visualized what the finished game would look like for far too long. And even if I did, I never actually wrote it down. Being intentional and forward-thinking will make it a lot easier to turn your dreams into reality. I've got another tool to help with that as well. Not a software this time. It's called a Gantt chart, which I mentioned in a few of my previous videos. Here's a simple one for the FPS prototype I worked on last month. It's a little hard to read at first, but let me explain. These lines up here are the tasks I want to do throughout the month. Down below I've written an O for each day of the month divided into weeks. Under the O's, I wrote the first letter of the task I wanted to work on for that day. So starting out with B for basic movement for the first 3 days of the month, then moving on to P for projectile weapons, and so on for the other days. There are more legible ways of doing a Gantt chart in other apps though. For real engineering projects I've used Excel in the past, or Google Sheets, which works great. The rest of the video is going to be about improvements I came across as part of this time management scheme, starting with prototyping. I've always been in favor of prototyping. In fact, that was one of the few things I did right with Breezy's development process. I made this video a few years ago talking about prototyping, and everything I said then still applies. In that video I mentioned 3 different depths of prototyping: paper mockups, visual prototypes, and gameplay demos. I find that doing all 3, in order, can give you a good idea of what it would be like working on a project that might take a year or 2, and only a month. In fact, that's exactly what I've been doing since I finished Breezy. So far, I've done 2 major prototypes, starting with a written description, then a visual concept, then a gameplay demo that I take a month to make. It's important to remember that you're not just doing this to make a game. You're doing this to figure out how viable it would be to develop this prototype into a full game. Of course, if all you want to do is just make a game, you could take that angle. As I mentioned though, it's important to be intentional about that before you start. So after I finished these month-long prototypes, I wrote down approximately how long it would take to develop a new weapon, a new enemy, and so on. I mentioned earlier that it's also okay to just make smaller games for the sake of it. I also did plenty of that this year in the form of game jams. These were a good opportunity to work on the coding skills I wanted to utilize for the prototypes, since Breezy's code can best be described as a tangled mess of spaghetti. Well, maybe not that bad, but it's certainly no lasagna. They were also a great chance to just make a fun, semi-polished game, which I certainly did. I did 2 game jams this year, and I'm immensely satisfied with both of them. Also, I mentioned that I would do a second video about Suit'em that second prototype after development wrapped, but, well, that just turned into this video. Whoops. So I keep talking about time management and thinking forward, but did I actually walk the walk and plan out my year? Well, kind of. After releasing Breezy, it was very clear that I did something wrong, which was when I started realizing all the errors in the development process. From there, I was itching to start planning out the rest of the year, but I was also pretty tired of constant game dev, especially on just one game. I knew I would need something less structured, so I did something wild. I scheduled my downtime. By that I mean, I gave myself as long as I needed to spend time on different projects as I got interested in them. The first project, which I started the day after releasing Breezy, was Deck Dojo, that first month-long prototype. After that, I spent some time working on projects in Rust, game jams, the Breezy relaunch, or just schoolwork. Having some scheduled time where I could just do whatever struck my fancy without feeling guilty of neglecting my game or just being aimless was great for my overall productivity during this time, as well as my stress levels. You'll notice that was the first time I mentioned schoolwork in this whole video. Luckily, this is only my first semester in college, so the workload was certainly bearable. In fact, I found myself with considerably more free time to make games than I did back in high school. However, thanks to that scheduled downtime, if the workload did ramp up, then I had the free way to drop my game dev stuff for a while and get caught up. But for my time developing Breezy, I was a high schooler, and even without structured scheduled development, there were still times where I was productive. Those times were the summers, where I had basically all day to work if I wanted to, which I usually did. The first summer I worked on the game, it was in the extremely early phases of development, but I was still able to put out plenty of devlogs for it and get the first course out. The second summer I was able to finish all the game's main courses. The third summer I released the game. I'd say that's pretty productive. I was at least smart enough to plan around summers being very productive at this point in my life, and I want to generalize that out to knowing my limits in general. Game dev is just a hobby right now for me. I'd love for it not to be that way, but until you guys start buying my game, it's not going to happen. So schoolwork and work take priority over game dev. Working around that is a key component of being able to look ahead and become productive. So I mentioned planning. What's the plan for next year? Well, I want to finally finish the Breezy relaunch and end the Breezy saga for good. After that, I want to start thinking about a potential next game. Maybe an expansion of Deck Dojo or Shoot 'em Up. Maybe something else. Who knows? As for some other end-of-year stuff, I've got to mention just how grateful I am for each and every one of you viewers and players. I'm thinking of switching up the content on this channel to some less formal stuff, maybe even a little bit unscripted. This, as always, comes with the promise of more frequent uploads, but I always seem to come back to that old faithful 2-week schedule. Except for this month, apparently. I also didn't mention the sheer amount of music I made this year, only some of which is released. Expect a video soon compiling all the songs I made in 2023. I think that's everything though, so until next time, have a good day.